Brought to you live and in color. Okay, what I'd like to do is talk about shop safety and practices. And here's a picture showing some of the sorted safety items with, gloves and respirator and proper shoes and hearing protection, safety glasses. And at first, when I made this slide, the black lettering kind of obscured on the background, and I was going to change it. And I thought, well, maybe I should just leave it there as an example of how some.
So, I'm not sure if you how familiar are with this, but normally.
Right.
You look at the slideshow?
Okay, I'm gonna just let you continue. I was trying to figure that out.
But I thought that would be a good example of showing how you can have things, be difficult to see sometimes depending upon the way the lighting is and what your background is. And I've been licensed since 1981. I served in the military in the Army National Guard for 33 years, 9 years of that being in the field artillery, and then 24 years in a maintenance shop working full-time at Fort Devens. And I was given additional duties while I was up there, being the building fire marshal and the safety NCO. I also, before that, I worked 3 years at a company called Comdell Incorporated, where we worked on high-powered RF generators, which was running anywhere from 500 to 5,000 watts. And they were all solid state, and that was back in the 1980s.
Sorry to interrupt again. I see that icon now. So that puts that up on the screen, but your notes are here. Does that work for you? Or you
that should be all right. If it's better for the screen, then yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have all the extra bell loop on there. So you can, if you know how to advance, you can advance it this way, or you can go back this way.
Okay.
That work for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Carry on. Thank you. Sorry.
And I've been doing electronic work since I was about 8 years old. I would scavenge parts from old TVs and radios. And I had one of those 50-in-1 project kits from Radio Shack. And one of the things about general safety is I learned, to keep one hand in your pocket. Okay, and an example of that, I have this radio here that I bought off of one of my friends over 50 years ago. And he had a 2-prong plug, non-polarized, going through a half-wave rectifier and feeding it where it was supposed to have a 90-volt battery inside. And I had brought this home, set it on the bench, went to hook it up. Just a minute. And the normal tendency would be to hold it with one hand, while it's on the bench, and then put the coax on. Well, I learned, somewhere along the line, keep one hand in my pocket. I also think God had a lot to do with this, because as soon as the coax hit the outside of it, sparks flew and it blew the 15-amp fuse in the wall. And I just kind of stood there and looked at it, and it's like, no, that cord is coming off right now. So I cut it off, and I've never done anything more with it since. But it's a good reminder of what can happen. And, review the procedures before you start something, especially if you haven't done it for a long time. You know, I know this is kind of thing, one of the things from the Army that, you know, you look at the manual, go through the procedures, you know, make sure you have all the stuff you're supposed to have to do it with, all the tools, materials. Because there's nothing like getting halfway into something, then you find out you need some part or some tool you don't have, and now you have everything all over the place, and you either have to put it together or put it aside. Okay. You know, gather your tools and equipment, have a good stable stance and a comfortable seat. Is it heavy? Then get help lifting it and don't overstretch yourself. Are all the cables disconnected before you move it? Do other family members know you're working so you don't get surprised? You know, I was working on something one time, and all of a sudden, you know, my young one came up behind me and I didn't have any idea it was there, and he said something, and it's like, yeah, I jumped back, you know, and is a cat or dog gonna jump up on the bench you get behind you or under your feet? And minimize exposed wiring. You know, this is mostly for like when you're working on something that you're designing and building, breadboarding. You know, I find I can put wire nuts over things, you know, put things on terminal strips so there's less chance of just loose high voltage wires hanging around. Okay. And follow the plug back to the outlet so you know you've got the right one. You know, you have 6 things on the bench, they've all got a black cord. You know, you think you've pulled the plug out for what you're gonna do, and actually you haven't, you pulled the other plug out, so you go to check, stick your hand in there, and then blam. You know, and use proper protective equipment. Check your multimeter for functionality before checking for live voltage. There was an article, I believe, in QST a few years back about somebody who got electrocuted. They were a professional electrician. They checked, you know, what they were working on before they started. The meter said there was no voltage there. And then they went to work on it and got fried. And what had happened was the meter probe itself had been broken right inside where it connects. So it didn't show the fact there was live voltage. And what they suggested to do is put it on R1 and make sure that your meter works. Okay. And are you tired? Okay. If you're tired, you're more likely to make mistakes. You know, it's best to just leave it for the next day or go away from it for a while. And complacency. Okay, you've been working on low voltage stuff for so long, you forget about high voltage. You know, I started working on things with tubes many years ago. Tubes have high voltages. A lot of the stuff nowadays is all transistorized, so, you know, you get used to working on low voltage things, you forget the high voltage stuff. And this kind of goes back to the idea of, you know, review the procedures before you start. Okay. And hearing protection, okay. Take a look at your hearing protection before you put it on. Make sure there's no, you know, insects or foreign objects inside of it. You know, there's, you know, you might have to run your finger in there. You know, just, you know, make sure it's reasonably clean so you don't, you know, have any surprises. Eye protection, the condition of it, you know, is the strap good? You know, can you see through it good enough? I mean, it's better off to spend $5 on a new pair of this than to lose an eye. Okay. Work gloves are serviceable. Do they have holes in them? And I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, electrician's gloves. Yes, you have to check that, you know, for holes in that. And you can't just use those plain old rubber gloves you get at the drugstore for working on electrical things. They're just not made for that. But I'm also talking about like leather work gloves or something. If you're working with something that's got metal that might have sharp edges or wood that has splinters. Okay. Your shoes and your boots, are they the right shoes for the job? Are they serviceable, non-slip if it has to be, waterproof if they have to be? Okay. And I found that there's these simple things called a sauna suit. They cost maybe like $5 or $10. They're basically just a very thin vinyl suit, and they're great for working on, if you work with fiberglass insulation, because it doesn't stick to it. And you can use, excuse me, expendable things. And your clothing, is it going to catch on wires or parts? Okay, non-slip insulated shoes, rings and watches, jewelry that can get caught in tools or conduct. They used to tell us to, before you work on the radios, remove, rings and jewelry or anything that could get, caught on something. And I've seen the pictures of people who, work on cars and the ring went across the battery and there's a big fry on their hand. It's not something you want to do, And I found, this might sound stupid, but I've done, woodworking or things in the yard, have to wear a long sleeve shirt, or a sweatshirt or something to prevent splinters and cuts. And do you need to wear gloves? Like metalwork might have sharp edges. And for ladders, okay, you want to use the right ladder, okay, and secure the ladder. And one thing that somebody who was a contractor showed me, one of those extension ladders, he took pitchforks and stuck them in the ground at the base of it, and that holds it in place really well. And you want to, when you're climbing on it, you want 3 points of contact. Okay, you want to make sure the angle is correct, not, straight up, not, too far out. Okay, and you want to make sure there's no overhead wires or obstructions or hazards that you're going to be climbing through or having it stick on. I can remember many years ago seeing a video of a TV news truck had gone, to a scene. They went to raise their automatic power antenna. They were underneath a high tension wire, it went up and hit that. I don't think anybody got hurt, but the entire electronics in the van got fried. And the condition of the ladder, and, is there like a beehive or something in the rungs? You get the ones with the hollow rungs, and all of a sudden, you haven't used it for a long time, you go to set it up, and all of a sudden, bzz, And don't leave things on top of the ladder. Somebody goes to move it or you climb up and you don't know, and all of a sudden, bong, And you can use a rope to pull things up rather than try to carry something up and be unbalanced. And this is showing different types of ladders and the load conditions they can do. And this is including yourself and whatever tools and things you have. And let's see if I can bring it back to the, okay. This came from safety culture. It says, choose the right ladder, check for damage. Ensure physical capability, set up the ladder on a flat and stable surface, set up in a safe place. Never lead or reach away from the ladder. Always maintain 3 points of contact. Only take small items up and down a ladder. apply the 1 to 4 rule. That's where for every 4 feet up, it comes out 1 foot. And climb down cautiously. And I'm not showing where I got it from. And your work area, okay? Your lighting, can you see what you're doing? Is there any flicker because of your lighting? Is there, any strange colors or shadows being cast? Is it your work area, is it stable and strong, non-slip surface, flame resistant, metal or wood or plastic or fiberglass, whatever it happens to be made of, is it the right material for the job you're going to be working on? And your wiring and your access to plugging things in. And your workpiece itself, is it right on the edge of the, you don't want to have something right on the edge of the table like this. Where you're working on it and all of a sudden it falls down. You can get hurt from that or it can get damaged. Can you turn the power off or reach tools and equipment without exposing yourself to a hazard? If it gets too messy, stop and put things away, clean up. Clear the area around you. Can you back off or get out in a hurry if needed? You have a toolbox sitting down on the floor behind you, you forgot about it, something sparks or whatever, you jump back, you trip over the toolbox, and now you've added more to the problem. And your drawers not open such you trip over the low drawers, the whole thing tips over. You pull out the lowest drawer on a filing cabinet or a toolbox and you take something out and you leave it open, then you forget about it or somebody else comes along, they don't see it and they trip over it. Or either that or you pull too many drawers open on the top and the whole toolbox flips over. And tools, use the right tool for the job. Is it sharpened? Don't force it. You go to drill a hole and it goes good the first couple of times and then it starts, the bit might start getting dull, so now you press on it harder. Pretty soon you're pressing on it with the force of 1,000 elephants because it's done, because it's dull and something breaks or slips or, if you're using a knife, cut away from yourself, and keep your hands out of the way. It's all too easy. I'm gonna, cut this piece of paper, cut this box open, you stick your hand here and then all of a sudden slip. You don't want that to happen. Okay. And the condition of your power cord or your battery, is your tool double insulated or grounded? And one thing I hate to see is when somebody takes the 3-prong grounded plug and they pull the ground plug off. Okay. Are the wire cutters strong enough for the job? A piece is going to fly off. I haven't tried this myself, but I've seen people do things where they put like a rubbery substance inside of the wire cutters and then supposedly that keeps it from cut something and it goes flying off. When using a power saw or table saw, make the blade high enough to cut through the material, but not too high. If you slip, you just cut your fingertips. Okay. Too many times people the blade's all the way up, and it doesn't have to be. Make it like 1/8 of an inch above the workpiece, and that way if you slip, it's not as bad. We had an incident one time at Fort Devens. I didn't see it happen, but the old carpentry shop, excuse me, they didn't have windows in the doors. And the doors opened inward, and somebody was working, cutting a piece of wood on a power saw. somebody went to come in, you know, and when they opened the door, it bumped into the person that was cutting the wood and it pushed them into the saw, and I think they lost a finger. You know, read the instructions and know your tool. Your soldering iron is safely stored, not lying on the bench or too close to other things. You know, the condition of your hand tools, and store saws with the blade facing away from people. This is mostly to do with hand saws. You know, I find that, you know, hang them up and make it so that the blade is away, less likely for somebody to rub up against it and get cut. And in the emergency, okay, survey the scenes. I have a thing, Paul's finger from unseen high voltage cable. We had another person that worked with us at Fort Devens that was telling a story how there was a big thunderstorm and, you know, some tree branches came down and stuff. And he went to, you know, after the storm ran, he went to go to move a branch. He didn't see that there was a high voltage cable underneath it. It actually burned off the end of his finger. And I read something recently where about a year ago, somebody was actually killed by a very similar thing. They went to move a branch. They didn't see a high voltage cable under it. And, you know, so this is one of the things. You got to look around at the situation, you know, carefully. If you see somebody on the floor, you know, what caused them to have to be on the floor? Is there something that you're going to be walking into that you're now going to be a casualty? Okay. And have your location emergency phone numbers posted so that, you know, okay, some visitors, you know, you have some friends over or something, or they're, you know, they don't know who to call right away. Of course, nowadays we have the caller ID and the, you know, 911 will pick up your phone. I think it might even pick up your location, but that might not always be the case. I used to have it, and where we worked at Fort Devens, we had it posted right on the telephone. This is our location. This is, you know, even down to what room we were in. Okay, you know, somebody might, you know, be panicking when they see somebody, you know, lying on the floor. They don't know what's wrong. We had somebody that, you know, worked for an ambulance company many years ago in our old ham radio club in Danvers, telling how they'd get these phone calls. Quick, come right away. He's on the floor. He's not breathing. Click. Well, now they don't know where to go. You know, somebody, you know, they're in a new location. You just moved to a new house. You've only been there 3 days, and something happens. Well, you're gonna think about your old address. Okay. And have your phone accessible, not locked. I recently saw something where and I believe it was a 4-year-old had, you know, seen somebody drowning in their pool outside, tried to call on the phone. It was a cell phone, but the phone had a cracked screen and therefore it wouldn't allow the phone call. She was able to go get an error. I think she actually did CPR from having watched, you know, on TV. Might have been 8 years old, but anyway, it was really an incredible story. It saved the guy's life. And the people know CPR and first aid, and you have a first aid kit. And, you know, field and portable operation, okay? Ground the generator and equipment, okay? How about your cable runs? Is there any tripping hazards? Okay, what about if you get lightning or severe weather? Are things gonna blow away or towers fall over? You know, the terrain you're in, you know, are there holes or rocks, etc.? You know, what kind of wildlife are you gonna be running into? And guy lines visible at night. We used to use this stuff called engineer's tape. It wasn't sticky, it was just a white cloth tape that you put on the guidelines of your antennas, so that at nighttime it was more visible. And this is showing about fire extinguishers, using the right ones for the right situation. And this shows, which ones you should use on what. The water ones are good for wood, paper, and not to be used on flammable liquid or electrical. Dry powder is good for wood, paper, textiles, flammable liquids, gaseous fires, and live electrical equipment. Foam is good on wood, paper, textiles, flammable liquids, and not to be used on electrical equipment. CO2 is good for flammable liquids, live electrical equipment, but don't use it on wood, paper, and textiles, flammable metal fires, and don't use it in a confined space. And wet chemical is good for cooking oil fires, wood, paper, textiles, etc. Discharging carrier contents onto a fire from at least 1 meter distance. And here's some things I've discovered and learned over the years. And, the tin, the end of the wire, like just the tip of it, and not the whole piece, then it's easier to bend, that way, you have a stranded wire, you just get the end of it tinned, it'll hold it together so you can wrap it around, whatever you have to do more easily. And masking tape is your friend. You can draw lines on it, make templates and labels, particularly if you have to cut something that's dark, dark piece of masonite, you just put the masking tape down on it. You can see a pencil line real easy. And you can save the strips insulation from wires and use a spaghetti. And when you splice something, stagger your splices. Don't put them all right over each other, because otherwise you have this big fat wad. Plus the fact that it's more likely it's going to short together if anything goes wrong. If you stagger them, then everything comes out a lot smaller and it's easier to work with. And you can use a drill to make twisted pairs of wires. And fold over the end of the tape so you can peel it off easier. Have an inventory book. If you're like me and you have tons of, old tubes and stuff or things in different locations, then I can just go through my inventory book and say, okay, I know I've got this. Use the same ruler or measuring tape on the final project, because not all rulers are the same, or they might have wear on them. I've run into this problem before where, you look at a ruler and it's like, there'll be 1/8 of an inch between where the end of the ruler is and where the first number starts. Another one might be, 3/16 of an inch difference. Some might be right perfectly on. If you use the same ruler for each thing, then you're going to get the result you want. Okay. And to pick up metal filings, use a magnet with a bag over it. Okay, just stick a magnet inside of a paper bag or a plastic bag, clean up your metal filings, then you just fold the bag over, pull it off, and it's right there in it. You don't have it all over the magnet. Okay, use a paper or plastic straw to cover wires on chokes or transformers when you're painting it. If you modify something, make a note of it and leave it with the item and in the manual. Put transistors in last to avoid heat damage. And try to mount the parts so the labels are visible. And some more things. New parts are not always good. They could be fake. Clip leads are crimped and not always good. I found I'll have to solder them. I've seen some where they've even been crimped over the insulation, or they might just have one strand of wire, doing all the work. Double check the outer sleeve insulator PL259 connectors on your cable, okay? Well, this goes to other cables. There's nothing like you've soldered the most perfect, PL259 connector, you're all set to put it on the antenna, and you didn't put the outer sleeve on. A propane torch works good for making RG8 connectors instead of trying to fight with a soldering iron, and it takes 20 minutes to heat it up. And store variable capacitors so they're fully meshed. That way, if something gets dropped, or you drop the capacitor itself, it's not as likely to bend the plates and ruin it. And I don't know how many people know what a dim bulb tester is, but that's where you have a lamp or a light bulb, an incandescent type, in a series with your radio or piece of equipment you're going to be working on. And that way, if there's a short circuit in it, the light bulb will just light up instead of blowing fuses or causing more damage. And it's a good visual indication of what's going on. With the old 5-tube American 5 radios, this is a good thing, because now you'll first turn it on, the bulb will be somewhat bright, then it'll get a little bit dim, and it'll brighten up a little bit more. If it's fully bright, that there's something shorted. And I made this here. It's a special plug where both plugs are wired in series. I can plug a lamp into one side and that item can be tested on the other. And if it has a 2-prong plug, I like to replace it with a polarized or a 3-prong plug. And make sure the case is not hot, live electricity on a metal case thing like that radio had. Power up things in the shop every so often, so that the capacitors don't dry up in them. And if you have something stored for a long time in a shed or whatever, are there any insects or rodents in it? Or also if you, buy something at a yard sale or whatever, and use a brush to wipe off the bench, not your hand. I just got a few things here, I'll just brush it off. Well, now there's a little piece of glass or a little piece of metal, and you get it in your hand. Okay. Send in the warranty paperwork as soon as possible. When you get something new, I had a meter one time that I had bought, online, and I never even opened it up for like 3 months after I bought it, and then I found out that it didn't work. Well, it's too late now. Fortunately, it wasn't an expensive thing. But, when you cut a shaft, make a chamfer. Okay? If you have a variable resistor or something, and you cut the shaft on it, just kind of bevel the edge all around a little bit. It doesn't have to be a really deep bevel, just enough to keep it so the knob can slide in and off easily. And use a nut driver or socket wrench to avoid scratching when you put the resistor on or switch or whatever. And it didn't move forward. Okay. And I found that I can use old utility knife blades as great magnet wire. And a crystal earphone is a good thing to have around. They're handy for just checking low-level audio signals. And those small blister packs that you get, like, the Radio Shack packs used to come in, they're really good for if you just have to mix up a small amount of epoxy, just put it in there, and then you can just throw that thing away when you're done. A small amplified speaker is a good thing to have around. And improvement is a continuous process. Okay. When you want to discharge capacitors, it's good to have a resistor on it that discharges it somewhat slowly rather than just take the clip lead and instantly it just blam, now you have a huge current going through it. Excuse me. That way you don't get a big, huge current going through and it fries the clip lead or something else. Old pill bottles are good to coil form as small part storage. And if they have a piece of test equipment that's got a sneaky problem with it, you should fix it or replace it. Because there's nothing like, well, this meter is good, but in this part of the scale, it doesn't work just right. And then this audio generator is good, but on this band, it doesn't do just like it should. And, then now you have, several pieces of sneaky test equipment, and now you don't know where the problem really is. And diagrams and print are not always accurate and could have errors. I don't know how many times I've seen an article printed in a magazine, and a month or two later they say, oh, this resistor should have been like this, and this capacitor should have been that, and this connection should have been over here. And this is something you have to watch out for when you look at old magazine articles and stuff. Okay, I got the diagram of this, but it might have an error in it. Okay. And try to avoid using one-of-a-kind, unobtainium parts. And when you drill a hole, in metal or wood, I find it works good to drill a hole from both sides. If you can, this avoids getting splinters on the other side. And this usually works if you drill a pilot hole through it first. Now you've got something to guide your bit from both sides. And here's an example of the Amico AC1 schematic. What I'm trying to point out here is if you look at the cathode and they're keying the cathode, okay, you're going to have your high voltage go through the tube, so you're going to have 300 volts on that key. And here's a similar thing on the corner 400. Again, you have goes through the tube and you're keying the cathode. And let me see if I can go back. And this is a solution that I came up with for that. This is a transmitter I built, and it has a 6L6 as cathode keyed. But I used a high voltage FET over here, MOSFET, so I can just key that with 12 volts. This is my key click filter in here. And that way I don't have the high voltage on the key. And this is when you know it's time to clean up the bench. And this is just showing how I made some labels for this. And the way I did it was I took some popsicle sticks, and I have one of those letter stamp sets, and I just pressed it into the wood. And then I took a pencil and ran it through into the lettering. And originally I was going to nail it on with tiny little nails, but then I just figured I can just glue it on. And I think it came out pretty good. And here's an example of an amplifier. It's a 5-watt guitar amplifier. And what I'm trying to show here is that the switches and things are sunk in those holes where this is an item that's going to be transported a lot. There's less chance of something getting broken and snapped off. And there's also, vent holes on the top of it. And I deliberately made the holes too small for a beer bottle to fit in. And here's where I got a Heathkit DX35. All I did was I bought the metal parts from somebody on eBay. All it really consists of when I got it was just, the case, the metal, and there were two switches on the front, one of which wasn't the right one. And using what I had hanging around, I was able to build the whole thing up. But then I'd made, the way I put the switch in, this is backwards compared to what they had printed on there. So I just took a large piece of aluminum, cut out into a circle, and then I painted it white. And then I had these stick-on numbers that I got from a hobby shop, and I put them on there and painted it green. Then I just peeled the stick-ons off, and it left the pretty nice looking result on there. This is something I find. This is a 250 volt regulator, and these little connectors here, I think they came out of old computer power supplies or something, but it's good because all I got to do is just slide it on, and if one of these transistors blows or whatever, it's an easier thing to work with. And this is just showing how the masking tape is good. Notice how on this one you can barely see, the lettering, but where the tape is, you can see it nicely. And if one of the books gets filled up and I, have to put it into a larger book and use it for something else, just pull the tape off and make a new label. Here's another good example of where the masking tape is good. And now it's going backwards. That's a 360 volt regulator, and what I did here was instead of just using a single resistor, I used a few of them in series. I was worried that if I just use a single one, it might arc over. Maybe I didn't have to worry about it so much, but I feel it's better safe than sorry. And here's somebody's putty cat sitting in their radio. Here's another putty cat sitting in something. And this is the Heathkit DX35 as I got the metal parts. Okay, so anybody have anything to add or any questions or? Okay. I don't know how much. I was kind of hoping that, people would be able to add in things they've run across too, but oh well. Okay, I guess that's it.